Everybody, thank you all for coming. I wish we were going to a monthly, but events don't let us really do that. Um, in any case, hopefully one of these days we can go to one monthly. Events won't keep on happening. Um, I'm a little bit more dressed up than usual because I just did a segment for I-24 on the Big Beautiful View. Excuse me, Big Beautiful Bill and Musk's new party, nothing relating to us at all or indirectly. In any case, here we are. Uh, Prime Minister Netanyahu is supposed to be getting on a plane one of these hours. The trip keeps on being delayed, at least for the moment. One story is it's because of the need to make some sort of deal with the ultra-Orthodox. They're threatening to bring down the government if they don't get at least in writing the actual bill. We'll talk about that a little later. Um, and there are others, the Prime Minister's office is claiming, no, that's not true. It's for other reasons altogether. Who knows? One of the other interesting and a little bit concerning things is, according to Israeli correspondents about to get on the plane with him, as of right now, there seems to be no place in the schedule where there'll be any sort of press meetings. Netanyahu seems to want to avoid that. Maybe Trump always loves the press, so we'll have to see how that works out. That seems to indicate that there's no deal that's been cooked up or is ready to go initially. Now, for anyone following, as we know, Hamas answered the theoretical yes to this new version of the Witkoff agreement, but it was a yes with various stipulations. The stipulations can be agreed to. Not that Israel has to agree to all of them, but can be negotiated, and it's within the realm of reaching an agreement relating to all of that, probably with the exception of the agreement. They want the personal guarantee from President Trump that if the negotiations don't succeed, they'll continue going and Israel will not renew the war. I'm not sure what President Trump will or will not be willing to say. If I'm Hamas, I'm not sure I accept the word of President Trump, but that's a different story altogether. That's like accepting the word of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Both not exactly bankable. And I'm not saying anything negative about either of them, but as politicians, you cannot bank their promises for very long. So it's unclear. It's unclear. It looks like, and again, I say this, it looks like because it's so hard to tell. It looks like Netanyahu wants to make a deal at this point. It looks like Netanyahu may have decided, and I put this in parentheses, may have decided that he's willing to take a risk and possibly go for elections now as opposed to later. He could be assuming that things will not get any better, and now is at the high point, or at least now, plus maybe you can come to a couple of agreements, whether with Syria, Lebanon, maybe Saudi, between now and election day. If elections are called, let's say, in 3 or 4 weeks, the elections won't take place for at least 90 days and probably longer. And during that period, he could pull off a few more peace deals, and then he could run on a different platform, and we can all forget about October 7th. Um, he is a great politician. I didn't say he's a great leader, but he's a great politician, probably the best in Israel's history in terms of raw politics. But I'm not sure he's reading the situation right. Um, Polls have not shown him gaining what one would have expected from the Iran war or Iran operation. And so, but he may have internalized his own successes, and sometimes we don't even understand on the outside what's really going on. So he thinks he did great. And since he doesn't blame himself for October 7th, he must believe that no one else does as well. Maybe. I don't know. But in the meantime, the war has gone on. And whether the war is going to end in an agreement on Sunday, well, today's Sunday, on Monday in the Oval Office, I don't think so anymore, but maybe, or Tuesday or Thursday, or sometime later. Soldiers died on Friday. 2 soldiers died, one in an accident, a wartime accident, sort of accident doesn't happen in peacetime. At 3 a.m. in the morning, a vehicle fell into a hole, and as it was falling, it hit another vehicle and killed the driver. and the second tank was hit with anti-tank missiles in southern Gaza. The poor soldier had only been in Gaza a couple of days. I think he went into Gaza on Tuesday and was killed on Friday. A young man who had just gone into the army relatively soon, and just that's just two. And there were all the other soldiers that died over the last month as well. And that's not even talking about the Gazans who died. And it's not even relevant. I mean, it's somewhat relevant, but it's not really relevant. The issue whether the Gazans are dying because of direct orders by the IDF, which I don't think so, or because they're dying accidentally, because in order to kill another third level Hamas person who once, his title is first level. I mean, it was a notification about an hour or two ago. We killed the deputy or maybe the commander of the Hamas naval units in northern Gaza. Now, I don't even know if we haven't killed three other of them beforehand, but the current commander of the naval units, I think maybe Hamas has a rubber dinghy left as part of their navy at this point. I mean, it's absurd. These are not important people anymore. And that's one of the major things that I find disturbing. Again, Hamas is responsible. Hamas hides amongst civilians. There's no question about it. Hamas is a terror organization. All those things we can continue from today until tomorrow. But the end is too many civilians are dying in any case. And it's just a problem. I mean, I don't know how to define it. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know what sort of country we're going to have afterwards. Uh, I think I've written a few times. 40 years, it's been 40 years since I did reserve duty in Gaza. A long time ago, more than 40 years at this point. 40, 45 years practically, I guess, when I did a summer of reserve duty in Gaza. And even then, I saw the way we were reacting to some of the locals, particularly the younger kids. I was reservists, so I was a little bit older. Not that old then, but older. And the same time, we were with a group of regular soldiers. And even then, I said, if this is the way we act towards the Gazans back then, and believe me, the Gazans back then were not the same Gazans as today in terms of how they relate to us, etc., then what is that going to bring back to our society? And again, one of the things that's concerned me throughout our conflict, let's put it that way, is on some levels, I've always been less concerned about the Palestinians. Not that they aren't people and they deserve to be respected as people, but historically, the rights have generally been with us. But that doesn't make it any better, and it doesn't make it any better for our troops who do things that even if they were legally okay, and again, I do not, the nonsense of doing genocide is indeed nonsense. There's no genocide going on. But are war crimes being committed accidentally? Probably. Are we any better than the Americans were in Iraq? Any better than the Americans were in Afghanistan? Maybe. But the Americans didn't have to live next to the Iraqis afterwards. The Americans don't live next to the Afghanistans. America pulled out of Afghanistan 9,000 miles away. Goodbye. Maybe there'll be American diplomats in Afghanistan sometime in the future. But America doesn't have to live with the Afghanis as neighbors. Again, listening to me over the time, many of you have heard me many times, and of course, you read me and hear my podcast. I don't have any simple solutions. Don't get me wrong. But the continuation at this point is only counterproductive. And it's only counterproductive what's happening throughout the world. Look, there was rising anti-Semitism in the world before October 7th. Let's not kid ourselves. There was rising anti-Semitism both from the right and from the left. We've written about it. We've talked about it. It's been there. Pittsburgh occurred. I'm talking about the killing in the synagogue in Pittsburgh long before October 7th. Some of the far left demonstrations against Israel go back all the way to my day on campuses in the 70s, basically. The left turned against Israel, the far left. The larger part of the Democratic Party, that's relatively new, but I was on a panel discussing, oh gee whiz, I don't even remember when it was when the squad wanted to come to Israel, and Israel decided not to let the squad in, and so I had a debate. I think it was with Simcha Rotman, but I'm not even sure who I was debating at the time. But I debated the question. I thought they should let them in. I thought they'd make some publicity of a result of it, but that one or two of the members of the squad were hopeless. I've always thought that the Palestinian member of the squad, she has real reasons to hate us. And the Somali member, less so, but okay, she seems to be gone. But the others, they can be worked with. Cortez, we'll probably lost her forever by now, but by not allowing her here and not showing her some of the positive things with some of the negatives, we probably lost them forever. And that's a whole other discussion, and I don't want to discuss it now, but it's a whole other discussion of what it means for Israel to have lost the future of the Democratic Party, and I fear that's very much so. But that's, like I said, a different discussion altogether. Let's get back to the Gaza and reaching an agreement. It's very hard to accept the fact that we will probably have to accept some sort of agreement that at least initially Hamas will be in power. Whether Hamas will be able to maintain that power, I do not know. When it comes to the stage of rebuilding Gaza, I do believe that in order to get money and effort to rebuild Gaza, Hamas will have to step aside to a greater or lesser extent. I do not think, I'm tired of hearing this thing. If we do X, Y, and Z, we're going to have another October 7th. We are not going to have another October 7th. October 7th occurred primarily because we weren't there. Yes, they wanted to kill us on October 7th, but we weren't there. If there would have been 10 drones in the skies of the border between Israel and Gaza that early morning hour, most of the Hamas members would have been killed. The right drones, obviously. If the soldiers have been given the pkudah, which is to basically man your battlefronts at dawn, which is a standard IDF term, probably most of them would have been killed in the attack. But those things didn't happen. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to be surprised again. We will be surprised by something, probably not by Hamas from Gaza. Something else will come and surprise us. So we can't replay October 7th forever. We need to get the best deal we can to get our hostages home. We just can't allow them to stay any longer. And we can't do this double deal, this partial deal, because Netanyahu is afraid of the whole deal. Because we're going to leave behind another 10 soldiers for when? Till we negotiate some more? Till we push it off some more? The term in Israel, in Hebrew, they use the Hebrew version of selection, selexia, which really comes from the Holocaust. People talk about that, about what happened at Auschwitz. When the Jews would arrive at Auschwitz, they would be Dr. Mengele or one of his minions deciding who lived and who died, the selexia. And here the hostage families keep on fearing and talking about the selexia. And so we really can't have another selexia. We need them all, maybe not together at the same time, but an agreement that brings them all home at one time. Now, Trump may go for that. I mean, Trump wants that. He wants to bring the war to an end. He calls himself the peacemaker, the person who brings wars to an end. Well, he can't bring the Ukraine-Russia war to an end because Putin won't end the war. He's been surprised by that. He still won't go out against Putin. That's a different discussion. But he's not getting the peace he wanted in Ukraine. So here he thinks he can possibly get the peace in Gaza. Well, if this was the 100th day of the war, I would say good luck to you. You're not going to get it. But it's not the 100th day. We're 600 plus days. Whatever we haven't accomplished in 600 and some odd days, we're not going to accomplish by fighting another 50 days or another 70 days or another 100 days. I heard the opponents, primarily Finance Minister it was Ben-Gvir, excuse me, that National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, saying we can't have a peace ceasefire. We need to kill tens of thousands of more Hamasniks. Well, leaving aside the fact that for every Hamasnik we kill, there seems to be another one popping up. There's nothing we can do to win this that way. We can't just keep on killing them and thinking they're just going to disappear. They're not. And we need to understand that. It doesn't mean we have to reach peace with them, but we need to reach some sort of modus vivendi for the moment to get back our hostages, reach some sort of deal that at least eliminate Hamas from power. Because, of course, as I said many times, they're the worst things that ever happened to the Palestinian people. The single biggest reason there's no peace between Israelis and Palestinians is Hamas. Going back, and I'm repeating myself from all the previous sessions, going back to the period of time of Oslo and immediate following it. They're the ones who started all the bombings. They're the ones who who pushed away any chance of peace over the years. But we can't get rid of them right now. And there's no simple solution. I was struck last night, or I guess it was this morning. This morning, actually, it was. Gadi Moses, the former hostage, was interviewed on this morning on the radio, and he talked about how he's talking to his captors, and they all had that 15, 20 kids, and he said to them, why do you have 15 and 20 kids? You can't feed the kids, you couldn't feed 5 kids well. Why are you having 15 and 20 kids? Their answer was to defeat you. If we have lots of kids, we'll eventually defeat you. A very chilling statement, to say the least. But clearly, we're not going to defeat them by killing them. But at least as we want to maintain some semblance of morality, we're not going to do that by doing that. In any case, all we can do is hope. All we can do is hope that President Trump really wants to make peace, and he can really force Netanyahu to accept an agreement that he doesn't really want, but that he can say he was forced on us by President Trump. Oh, President Trump who helped us in Iran. We need his support, etc., etc., etc. Because fighting some more to attain something that's probably not attainable, to gain minor advances while losing more soldiers, killing more people, and every day that goes by, we could have lost another one of the hostages. We have no idea if all the hostages that we said we're talking about 20 are still actually alive. So every day that goes by is a bad day. It's not a good day, and we need to reach an agreement. Hopefully, it'll be reached this week. Hopefully, Trump will force it. But we've been there before. We just don't know. We just don't know. Trump is hard to ever know what he wants. Netanyahu, we know what he wants, which is to stay in power, but it's a question of how he figures to do that and what's the best way for him to do so. So we can only hope that he'll reach an agreement. That's for Gaza. I want to switch a moment to Iran because I'm having a sinking feeling, to be honest with you, relating to Iran. I'm having a sinking feeling because I think I blame the way we ended this. Now, well, let me divide this into two. When we all were woken up at 3 a.m. with this notification that we had gone to war with Iran, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. It was like, why are we doing this now? Does this make any sense? Can't we reach some sort of an agreement with the Iranians? Can't the threat of our actions, the threat of the United States' actions, be enough of a leverage to force the Iranians, despite their dragging of their feet, to come to some sort of an agreement? That's, of course, a thesis that we'll never know. I still believe that was possible. It might have been possible, but we do not know. And I think Netanyahu rushed to do this because the opportunity existed. He got Trump to agree, and he thought this opportunity will never reoccur so easily. Now, on one hand, it was a wonderful operation from a tactical standpoint, from an almost strategic standpoint, militarily. It was an overwhelming success, without a shadow of a doubt. It had its negatives, obviously, in terms of the number of buildings that were destroyed here in Israel, and the 29 people, I think it was, who lost their lives from the Iranian missiles, which turned out to be more accurate than we thought. The Iron Dome worked fantastically, but not 100%. No one ever promised us it would work 100%. So the reality is there were negatives. But the big negative is what's going to happen now. And I fear that by agreeing to a ceasefire without a negotiated ceasefire, without having a deal with the Iranians when we agreed to a ceasefire, it was a big mistake. Now, that's what Trump wanted. He wanted a quick, I bombed them, etc. Now I got peace. I ended the war. That's Trump for you. But of course, that's the problem with dealing with Trump. I really do believe his heart's in the right place, at least vis-a-vis us. But because Trump is so shitchi, so not in depth and superficial in how he does things, he just wanted it done and over with. Maybe that's what Bibi promised him. I don't know. But the reality is, this shouldn't have agreed. I mean, look, all of us who were living under the missile threat wanted it to end. It didn't end soon enough for most of us. However, it did end too soon. It should have been extended to the point of some sort of negotiation, some framework of an agreement. You couldn't reach a full agreement with the Iranians at the time, but some framework of an agreement, even secretly, of what was going to come afterwards. But it seems that was not done at all. There seems to be no framework for agreement. The Iranians aren't agreeing to anything at the moment. They may agree to some sort of negotiations, but the big stick is not such a big stick anymore because it's not flying over the skies of Tehran at the moment. So we agreed to a ceasefire very quickly. Again, no plan B. I'm not sure that we went into this war like everything else with a plan B. One of the biggest problems of this government, I mean, it's Israeli governments throughout history, but particularly the Netanyahu government, is it never has a strategic plan B. It always has, we're going to do this. I mean, Netanyahu's known for delaying decisions, and we won't, and the big deal here was he actually made the decision. It's true. He always delays decisions and puts off military plans, but he made that decision. But again, where is plan B? Where is strategic plan B? What happens afterwards? What were the various scenarios that were worked out in advance of how this would play out? Okay, the military campaign excuse me, was very successful. But now what? What is the plan? Where is there a plan? And so now we have an Iran, until this war, Iran had no reason to be angry at us. It had no reason to think we were an enemy. I mean, yes, the Ayatollahs considered us an enemy. We were Satan number two after the big Satan, which was the United States. But other than that, we have no territorial dispute with the Iranians. We have no theological dispute with the Iranians. We didn't do anything other than the fact that we did support the Shah, but we also supported their regime against the Iraqis during their war. So they had no real reason for us to be their enemy. Well, we created good reason for us to be their enemy at this point. We killed their top generals. We killed their top scientists. We bombed their nuclear facilities. So we've made it very clear we're their enemy. Do we get to a deal quickly? Can we end the hatred somehow? I don't know. I don't think so. Can we stop them from building the bomb? Well, we don't know to this moment how far back we've pushed them. But what we do know for sure is we didn't push them back forever. And, if I'm them, I'm going to say, well, they stopped pushing me back at this point, but I'll learn from my lessons and I'll do things so that they won't know where they are. I won't know what we're doing. And one day we'll wake up and hear that the Iranians have the bomb. And then what? Well, maybe Israel's busy working, by the way, on Arrow 5. I'm not sure where Arrow 4 went to, but we're right at Arrow 5. And maybe that will do what I've always dreamed of since I was a little kid, create the effectiveness of a force field around Israel. Well, that would be nice. And maybe in that case, we don't care what the Iranian bomb looks like. But leaving that part aside, we've created or enhanced an enemy. And now what? What is plan B? And, what is plan B for Gaza? What is plan A for Gaza, for that matter? We have this wonderful plan for maybe reaching some sort of a peace deal with Syria, Lebanon, non-belligerence, some sort of thing, something with Saudi Arabia, but we only get that if we make a deal with the Palestinians. Who's our great diplomat who's doing all these things? Who's working these things out? Is it Marco Rubio? I mean, who is this person who's doing this? Is it Witkoff, the real estate dealer who make deals on real estate? Please, someone bring me back Kissinger from the dead. We need someone like that to make our deals and figure out where we go from the future. So I don't know. I am not overly optimistic at the moment relating to Iran. Certainly medium term. Short term, I think we're okay. But we'll have to see. Two other little things I wanted to bring up. One, I actually wanted to relate to an article in Haaretz a couple of days ago that one of our readers sent me, which talked about the fact that Israel is stronger now, but is no regional superpower. My answer to that article and to the person who sent it to me was nonsense. A lot of things we can say, and you just heard me say negative things about Plan B and everything else like that. But in terms of our defense and defense industries, we are a superpower in that sense. We're not an American superpower. We don't have worldwide reach, but our tech is better than anyone else's tech. Let's be honest. The American THAAD system cost 3 times, every missile cost 3 or 4 times what our missiles cost. They were 40% less effective, and they're being produced at the rate of 20 a year. So that doesn't make them very effective, to say the least. There is no other system but the THAAD to intercept ballistic missiles that's deployed at all in the world. No one else has a deployed laser system against drones, and we'll soon have a laser system against missiles that will be deployed. And I'll go on and on and on. Technologically, we're a generation ahead of everybody else, including America, when it comes to certain areas. We don't have airframes because we gave up on making the Levy, which was a whole other story 30 years ago. But when it comes to electronic warfare, when it comes to missile technology, when it comes to defense technology, when it comes to cyber, all these things we're ahead of anywhere else in the world. And it doesn't require size to be a defense superpower in this day and age. Well, anyway, that's my own opinion relating to that. Lastly, elections. Will there be? Will there won't be? I don't know. I mean, obviously there will be in a year plus. Domestically, the opposition to Netanyahu has a long way to go to organize themselves and decide who's running, how they're running, and everything else. There was major change when General Eisenkot withdrew from Gantz and withdrew from his party. Where he's going to go is not clear, but he clearly will bring votes from various places. He's actually one of the few people who's really liked by everybody, and we'll have to see where that brings things. All polls show the fact that Netanyahu won't be able to form the next government. Will the opposition be able to form the next government without the Arab vote? That's always been iffy to say the least. We'll have to see. But we'll know in the next, well, we won't know for a while, but it'll keep us busy, the things to write. Okay, time for questions. We're halfway through, so raise your hand to ask questions. Hopefully I'll see you, or my wife will yell at me and say that I'm missing you, so please. Okay, after all these weeks, no one has any questions? Okay.
Mark?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, could you speak for a minute vis-a-vis Iran? What are the chances of that government falling? If you looked at the Iranian population at large, do you have any feeling there's 4% of people who would like to have that happen, 40%? I really am interested in your opinion. Thank you.
Okay, the problem is twofold. Yes, the government is not popular. However, between not being popular and being able to take down the government requires a big step, obviously. If we look back at the success of taking down dictators, it usually occurs when the dictator's troops are not willing to fire on the opposition. Now, the Iranian government has multiple levels of support in terms of there's the army, the regular army, but then there's the Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard theoretically are more religious, more committed religiously to the leadership, and therefore can be counted on in difficult circumstances, difficult for the regime to come and do their fighting. Now, that said, from what I understand, the last time there were major demonstrations, the government had to rely partly on troops from Hezbollah to come in and help them put down the demonstrations. So I don't know how deep that goes. In other words, I'm quite sure the Revolutionary Guard of 40 years ago was very, very committed religiously, etc., to the Ayatollahs. Where they are today, I don't know. The Revolutionary Guard soldiers are people like everybody else at this point. They've, have connections to the internet and the real world and everything else. And so we really don't know how committed these people really are to the regime. So the only way we'll ever find out is if it comes down to it, will these people again fire on their own people? And of course, people don't want to take that risk also. When you think you're going to be fired on, it takes a great deal of courage in order to say, okay, I care enough politically. I want my freedoms. I don't want to wear my hijab, with all these different things, enough in a strong enough way that I'm willing to risk my life for this revolt. So we can't count on it. Let me put it that way. It's a hope, but we can't count on it. We did not engage in economic warfare against Iran. Now, was that a mistake? I don't know. Was it a mistake going back to when they fired the first 2 rounds of missiles at us, and some here in Israel wanted us to go after their oil reserves and go after their oil fields? Well, obviously Biden didn't want that because it would have increased the price of oil in the world. The only people who really gained from that is Putin. So we didn't. And so we didn't go to battle with the Iranian economy. Now, would helping to collapse the Iranian economy make them, rally around the flag or demonstrate more against the government? Again, these are things we don't even know. And, let me put one final thought. We have been very poor in the world in anticipating revolutions. Revolutions have occurred where we never expected them, whether it was in Ukraine, the Velvet Revolution that took place, whether it was, when Eastern Europe fell. I mean, all these things occurred suddenly without our expectations. And so we don't know. I just wouldn't bet on it. That's all I would say about it. That. Anybody else? Abby Layton.
There we go.
Okay.
It did it differently. I'm just with how many directions this meeting can go in terms of ceasefire and agreements that we make. It just seems like it could go so many directions, and I'm just wondering what you see in terms of what might happen if there isn't an agreement. I'm also aware that Netanyahu is coming to meet with Trump tomorrow. And I'm wondering what you think that meeting might be like. So 2 questions.
Look, the agreement, if there's going to be an agreement, the agreement is basically going to call for phase 1, 60-day ceasefire, the 10 hostages being released, 8 initially, 2 later on, 17 or so bodies being released, Israel pulling back to the perimeter but staying on the Philadelphia corridor, and then letting in food, which is one of the big questions of whether we let in food just generally or we let in food specific, the system that we're currently using, which we want to keep on doing. Hamas, of course, wants to get back all the food distribution for itself. So that's the direction it could go. That's what they want. How will the meeting go with in terms of Trump? Listen, Trump could say enough, Bibi, enough. These little details aren't important. Just sign the deal, end this war. The war is bad for you. It's bad for me. There's no point. It's not going to make any difference. The details are unimportant. Hamas won't remain in Gaza for very long. We'll make sure that they can't really govern Gaza. So just move, reach an agreement and end this. I could see Trump doing something like that. And I could see Bibi having a hard time saying no. Will that be the way it'll go? I don't know. We're dealing, let's put it this way. Like him, hate him, love him, whatever else about President Trump, but anticipate what he's going to say tomorrow? Don't. So we have no way of knowing. We have no way of knowing how that meeting is going to go. I do, again, it's very hard for me to, generally speaking, root for President Trump as an Israeli, and knowing that, quite frankly, he's better for us than what would have been the alternative. But as an American historian, knowing that what he's doing to America is very, very problematic, and I'm very worried about the future in so many different ways. So, I don't know. That's a different problem altogether, but it's a very real problem, just the same. Okay.
I have
Yes,
question. Hi, you want to opine upon the New York mayor election and your impressions about that? I know it's not part of Israel, but you were a former New Yorker.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I've been trying to decide whether I want to waste my time to write another article for Newsweek about that. Um, I think that the Democrats are in a position to lose the Jewish vote for the foreseeable future, because I've always looked, I looked at actually in my graduate studies, I spent a significant amount of effort trying to understand the Jewish vote, and why was it that economically Jews should vote like white Protestants, and yet they vote like poor Puerto Ricans, or not to say anything negative about Puerto Ricans, but in other words, they don't vote their economic, or they didn't vote their economic interests. Now, this is before the period of Trump, and where there's been this realignment in poor and rich and everything else. But let's put it this way: in the 80s and 90s, when wealthy people all voted Republican and less wealthy people all voted Democrat, that's generalization, but that's generally what was going on. Jews were voting overwhelmingly for Democrats. And the question was always why? Why? And the Republicans, by and large, with a few exceptions and a few moments of, particularly in the first Bush presidency, were always, quite pro-Israel, more so often than the Democrats, with the exception of President Clinton, who was very, very pro-Israel. But other than and Biden, we'll leave that part aside for the moment. But generally speaking, the Republicans are pro-Israel. So why would Jews not vote for Republicans? And the conclusion I came to was there's certain issues that are very, very deep and deeply rooted. And that deeply rooted issue amongst Jews, the place where the antennas are really strong, is anti-Semitism. And regardless of, how assimilated or lack of assimilated Jews are, they have really strong antennas towards issues of assimilation, towards anti-Semitism. And the Republican Party traditionally was the party of exclusion, the party of the country clubs that wouldn't invite the Jews. It was that party that didn't have Jews as part of the party, so to speak. Look at the number of Democratic congressmen versus Jewish Democratic congressmen versus a number of Jewish Republican congressmen. That's beginning to change a little bit, but 30 years ago, none on the Republican side, and certainly a significant number on the Democratic side. So that was the reason, more than anything else, that I believe the Jews stayed with the Democrats so long, even when their interests were not necessarily aligned. Today, we're getting into a situation where certainly the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is at this point anti-Semitic. To say that they're just anti-Israel just doesn't really make it. It really doesn't. You talk about the fact, I'll jump all the way to Australia right now. What happened over the weekend in Australia, where a Jewish synagogue was attacked, and a Miznon restaurant was crashed through and pretty much destroyed, and I guess was Brisbane, or maybe Melbourne. In any case, when the Chinese do something against the Uyghurs, do people start attacking Chinese restaurants? There's something that stretches clearly to anti-Semitism, and when the mayoral candidate basically says that Israel doesn't really have the right to exist as a Jewish state, and every other state has the right to exist as that type of state, but Israel doesn't have the right to exist as a Jewish state, then that's straight out anti-Semitism. And yet he's probably, not definitely, going to be the next mayor of New York. And his wing of the Democratic Party is flying high. And I don't have an answer. Some of it we deserve, in the sense that we do such a terrible job in explaining ourselves, and we do things that are not great to begin with. So, we earn some of the disdain. On the other hand, it's, out of proportion to all the other terrible things that are happening in the world. Again, why do people care so much about our terrible things when so many other terrible things are happening? So, all I can say is I think it's frightening. I think as Israel doesn't understand the implications of not having a two-party system where both parties support Israel, and it's a bipartisan issue. I blame part of that on Prime Minister Netanyahu, but not all of it. And I don't know where it's going to go in the future. One of the interesting things about the anti-Semitic actions across the globe, which theoretically are tied to Israel, all they're doing is proving Zionism right? I mean, Israel was established as to a very large extent, the idea was a refuge for Jewish people to go to. I mean, has all sorts of other reasons and positive things, but ultimately Herzl saw Israel as, or the state that was going to be Israel, as a place where the Jews could go to, where there's a fire burning under the feet of the Jews of Europe, is what he wrote. Well, he was right, obviously. But as anti-Semitism grows throughout the world, then one has to question those people who are against Zionism. Well, Zionism may not have solved the Jewish problem, but it solves the individual problem that Jews can come here. And while this is not a perfect place, as we've discussed and as we feel, it does provide a place of safety for Jews throughout the world. And therefore, as anti-Semitism increases by anti-Israel activists, all they're going to do is push more Jews to Israel, which goes against their whole goal. The Jews aren't going to leave Israel. They're going to come, more are going to come eventually in this direction. So that's my bit. Anybody else? Okay.
More, Mark?
Okay.
Would it made a difference if that we had taken out Khomeini?
I don't know. It might have. Again, we're making decisions or making not decisions, but we're positing things without really understanding the inner workings. So let's say we had taken out Khomeini. What would have happened to replace him? Would they have immediately replaced him? And Khomeini may be a religious figure, but he's also not a very popular figure per se. It's not like this beloved figure, the father of the country, or whatever. So would it have made a difference? I don't know. Should we have gone after the regime generally? Maybe, but again, one needs to have a strategy. What is your strategy? What are you trying to accomplish? Now, pushing back their nuclear program, that's a fine thing to try to accomplish. But, what are your contingencies? And what is plan B? And we're really bad at those things, generally speaking. So I don't have the answer. Would it have been better? Might have been. But again, that's a different view of history that we will never know. Of course, what's going to happen in the future is also a big unknown. Okay. One last call for anybody who has any questions.
I do.
Go ahead, Beth.
Me, Beth?
Yes, you, Beth.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying about the Jewish vote in New York, but I don't understand what's going on with figures like Brad Landers. Like, he was probably one of the most competent, and he's thrown his vote to Mamdani. I have relatives, and you know them, and they are pro-Mamdani. And I don't understand this with with this minority of Jews, but it had to take some Jews and some money to, swing them over. Can
Yeah,
you
okay. I mean, I definitely agree with you. I've heard from some people as
make that
well.
louder, Jim? I can't hear you.
I've heard from people as well who are supporting Mamdani Jews and are making the arguments or the excuse, well, the mayor of New York doesn't create foreign policy, right? He's the mayor of New York. But he's a very important political figure in the United States. And if we normalize this sort of situation, it's very bad. Now, I understand the appeal, his progressive appeal for some of the things that he wants to do, even though economically none of them make very much sense. None of them make sense, frankly. All his ideas, they sound really good, but if you look at trying to implement any of them, they're all very, very problematic. So, but hey, it sounds a fresh voice. I mean, look, think of this, the ridiculousness of the Democrats trying to bring Mario Cuomo, who was forced to resign because of sexual harassment, um, to run him to become the new mayoral candidate in New York. So the young people who are even more sensitive to sexual harassment charges than general, that's a whole other generational question, but by and large, so they all went and supported him because he sounds thrilling, interesting. And no, the Israel thing, not that important. It's not really that important to my life. More important, I get free buses. And they don't see the bigger picture at all. And I guarantee you, those people you're thinking about don't see him on on the overall arc of Jewish history. And maybe, again, not all Jews look at the Jewish side as the most important thing, right? In other words, there were even some Jews who supported Hitler initially and thought he would be okay. And the anti-Semitism was just, it's just him talking, trying to get votes, and that wasn't real. Unfortunately, those of us who know Jewish history know that you can't take any of these things for granted. And the rise of that wing of the Democratic Party, I think, presents an existential threat for Israel. And I think it's a real threat to American Jewry in the medium and long term. Again, it's coming from the right also. Jewish control of the media, Jews control too much, all those sort of things, and we hear it. And I think everyone should be concerned about it. Certainly the next generation, but the next generation sometimes is too involved in their own thoughts, I'm afraid. Okay, last call for anybody else.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead.
How do you think the government will react to the settler thugs going forward?
This government will do nothing. Period. They'll do a little, they'll make believe they're doing something because it doesn't look good. But beyond that, I don't think they're going to do anything. This government has settler thugs as ministers, basically, people who had been settler thugs. I mean, Ben-Gvir was certainly what one would define as a settler thug when he in his youth. So I don't see them doing anything at all in the short term and medium term. They're talking about educating the kids, et cetera, et cetera. Look, you have to develop. There's two parts to it. There's the planned part and there's the not so planned part. So the planned part has to do with trying to push some of the Palestinians off their land. Certainly in the South Hebron Hills, the area that movie was made about is probably more than just a group of youth or thugs or whatever you want to define them. However, the actions taken against the army in other places, that's clearly kids have gotten out of control. But it's very hard to modulate what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And once you can take violence against Palestinians, it's just a short way away from violence against other Israelis. So I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. Our dealings over 50 years have not been very successful in terms of the lawlessness that the settlers have created over a generation. Now, I should note the fact that one of the interesting things that's going on is it's a net negative movement of settlers outside of the West Bank. More people are leaving than are going in. Certainly, if you don't look at the two ultra-Orthodox cities that are sitting just over the Green Line, because as people our age, which are the original settler movements, get to our age, they realize there aren't good hospitals, there aren't good services for older people in these areas, and they move to cities. They move back and they leave the settlements and they move back to cities where the services exist. So right now there's a negative population movement between the West Bank. I'm talking about Jews right now. So we'll have to see. Okay. Well, I thank you all. Those of you who are listening to the podcast, I never remember to ask, so I'll ask you. Rate us on Apple Podcast if you can. Listen on Apple Podcasts. Give a nice review. It always would be helpful. And other than that, we'll be back, I assume, in 2 weeks, maybe with good news. Maybe we could wrap things up in 2 weeks. A summary of the war, maybe. It's possible. I wouldn't bet the farm on it, as they say. But in any case, I'm somewhat optimistic that maybe a deal will be made this week with Trump. So thank you all, and see you all in 2 weeks, and keep the feedback coming.